Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's 72nd episode of our Navigating Turbulent Times series. As you see there, we've just conducted a minute's silence on a day of reflection. It's 2 years to this day that the first lockdown happened here in the UK. Again, our condolences go out to those that have suffered through COVID and had a loss of life through COVID. So again, we've marked our respects today on the start of this episode. So today's episode, as you join us, I've already mentioned it's the 72nd episode, and our Navigating Turbulent Times series was born out of the first lockdown, as we're aware. In terms of virtual platforms and physical events no longer, that how we cascaded information and intelligence across to our membership and wider around how the sector is particularly going to cope through COVID and other navigating turbulent times. So today's episode, as you can see on your screens there, is FM Software Essentials, what to consider when buying new technology. And this is in partnership with our partner that we've been partners for a long time, is ServiceWorks Global. We're going to hear more from Hazel from that organisation today. Just want to remind viewers, listeners, today's episode is recorded, so you can cascade to clients and rewatch at your leisure. So please look out for that post-webinar. So as I just move along, you can see the lovely people on the screens. I'm Peter Brogan, Head of Research and Insight at IWFM. Many of you would have seen me on our previous episodes of NTT. So I'm going to take you through proceedings today and make sure that your questions, which we do have a dedicated slot in today's session, we will go through those, but please send your questions throughout the webinar. We'll try and put those into the different sections we've got on the webinar. But as promised, enough from me. I'm just going to introduce the panel, the stellar panel we've got today's episode. So I'm going to, as a gentleman I'm going to start with ladies first. Hazel Benson, Marketing and Operations Director from ServiceWorks Global, SWG. So Hazel, if you could just do a little introduction about yourself so our audience viewers know who they're hearing from today, so that'd be great.
Thanks, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, as Peter said, my name's Hazel Benson. I'm the Marketing Operations Director at ServiceWorks Global, or you may hear us referred to as SWG. We've worked with IWFM over quite a number of years. We're a provider of FM software, global operation. Me personally, I've got about 20 years in the software industry at, first of all, property management software companies, and more latterly at ServiceWorks, providing facilities management software. And we work with customers across all industry sectors. And we co-authored the latest good practice guide to selecting FM software along with the team at IWFM, which is launched today.
Lovely, thank you, Hazel. And there'll be more about that guide very soon. So another gentleman on the screen, as well as Simon, who we hear from in the Mo, is Mark Griffiths, Founder and Managing Director of WMA Consulting. So good afternoon, Mark.
Afternoon, Peter. Afternoon, everybody. Yes, Mark Griffiths. I'm MD of WMA Consultancy Services. We've been formed around about 3 years now. Prior to that, I was an operations director for a large service provider in the FM market. Have worked in FM effectively all of my working life. Originally an engineer by profession, but I've forgotten most of that. But an active member of the Technology Special Interest Group. Also been a peer reviewer for a couple of good practice guides on asset management and healthy buildings initiative that was produced after the first wave of lockdowns was starting to be released around about a year ago, and also chair of judges for the IWFM Awards. So see a lot of what's happening in the technology sector, and the last couple of years with the awards was the lead judge in the technology category as well.
We've certainly been keeping you busy, Mark, as well as your day job. So there you go. But thank you for that. And last but not least, we've got Simon. So Simon Attree, Director of Communications, North America, Magenta Associates. So good afternoon, Simon. I believe it is in Canada, if I'm right.
That's right. That's right. Hi, everyone. Hopefully, I know a few of you watching the webinar today, though I can't see your names. I'm Simon Attree, Director of Communications for North America for Magenta Associates, an integrated communications consultancy. Our founders, Kathy Hayward, who many of you may know because she actually formed FM World, which was Facilitate once upon a time in its founding. In terms of my background, I was a journalist in the FM space for almost a decade as editor of Facilities Management Journal and then IFM. So hopefully I've been around long enough and I've met enough people and I've seen enough things to contribute here positively today.
I'm sure you will, Simon. So thank you for that. So you've got to know the panel a little bit. So please send in your questions as promised. So we do have a dedicated question and Q&A section on today's episode. But as I've already said numerous times, please send your questions through. So before we just go into proceedings, as Hazel mentioned, I've got the great pleasure that today we're launching our guidance, good practice guide in terms of selecting FM software, and that's in partnership with ServiceWorks Global. So in terms of the new edition, so we did have a previous edition on this subject with SWG. The edition's basically looking at the scope of FM software functionally, building a business case, the selection and procurement process, which is fundamental as all of this is, and implementation advice. And most importantly, it's free to IWFM members. So please look out for that on the website. We're going to talk about some aspects of that today's episode, but just wanted to let the audience know that's going to be available today on today's on our website. So please look out for that. So I'm going to go straight into it. And as alluded to, the GPG itself starts by looking at trends and what's actually impacting the FM sector. And I think that's a good place to start, really, in terms of trends and really the pace of technology. And people talk about evolution and the external factors that are directly impacting FM software. So we've got some questions there we could ask, but what's quite interestingly, and Hazel probably could discuss more around this, a recent SWG survey, and mostly FMs mainly look for trade journals and industry bodies like IWFM, which is good to hear, for information on emerging FM tech trends. So again, it'd be important to know, but spoiler alert, this is where I want the audience to become interactive, is we're going to launch a poll now to get you involved, and we're going to build today's section around some of the, hopefully what the results tell us, and we've got a couple of questions to go through. So if we can kindly launch the poll and allow the audience to get through on this. So hopefully you see on your screens there, what we're asking you is, which of the following trends do you see directly influence the way in which you use and procure FM software over the coming years? So you've got a number of options there. It is multiple choice. So again, you can have more than one answer. So please see from that point of view, which trends are directly influence the way you use and procure FM software. So I'll just give you a moment to complete that, and then we will discuss the results and more. So at this point, as you can see, there's sustainability issues, cybersecurity concerns, virtual reality. So from that, and we do have the other, and of course the option of none of above, which might make us think about our polling going forward. But joking aside, please complete as you see fit. So I'll just give you a few more moments. It's always this point that you don't know how long enough. So yeah, I think if we close the poll there, Lucy, and see what the results are telling us. So what come up on top, which might not be a surprise, and find out more from the panel and experts in the moment, is the energy management reducing CO2 emissions, that you've got 86% there. Closely followed, well, not closely followed, 20% drop in legal regulatory compliance and hybrid working, which is a big theme, and many episodes of NTT have focused on the management of flexible workspace and this term hybrid working. Going down the list, you've got BIM, there you go there. I thought it might come out in order. What's the surprise? Integration with other systems, other technology, 69%. And then we got others there, cybersecurity with 24%. So if we start with the panel there, and I don't know who wants to come in first, in terms of the results there, obviously sustainability came up top in terms of the CO2 emissions. Is there anything there in terms of the results? And I know this is a poll of the audience on today's episode, in terms of concerns when it comes to energy management and reducing CO2 emissions. I just wondered, from your experience with clients and what you're hearing across the sector, how are you handling this that might help some of our audience that have that as a concern? So I don't know who wants to kick off.
Shall I start? If that's,
Go on, Mark.
awkward
Very
to put my
polite with your
up.
hand up. There you go. Go ahead.
No, I think it's inevitable that the energy, irrespective of the kind of recent price hikes that we're all acutely aware of and the reasons behind those. But that aside, COP26 was only 6-7 months ago. There are a lot of requirements coming out of that are going to permeate their way into the market, and I think there is inevitable pressure on everybody to really drive what they can in that direction. And interesting for me, one of the other answers that was highly responded to was the integration of other systems, because I think that's going to work hugely in terms of something like a CAFM system or whatever vehicle you're using to monitor what's happening with your equipment is more and more going to have to integrate with all those other tools and techniques that are out there for managing that energy, and making best use of the good quality data that you've got is going to be huge in that regard. And it's the flexibility of that data is much more affordable now than it ever was before. In the past, there's been a lot of constraints and how you can get that data to integrate with other systems, but I think that there are a lot more cost-effective techniques that are really going to help driving it. And this is going to be a challenge that's going to be around for years. We have other short-term challenges that are going to be there, but for me, this is going to be the longest-standing impact on the FM and workplace sector for some time. I think there's 40% of emissions in the UK alone come from the built environment sector, and half of those are from operational buildings. And that's a huge element of the output for the UK overall that needs to be controlled and needs to be reduced significantly. And the only way you're going to do that is to really understand your data and drive that data in a positive way. And what people really need to ensure is that the tools that they've got are really appropriate for the things that they want to measure, which may sound common sense, but so many people look at something because it's been presented in a certain way or has got certain bells and whistles with it. And sometimes you can just concentrate on the fundamentals and you'll achieve so much more than you would in perhaps overstretching yourselves in terms of what you do with that information in those systems.
No, it's great. And I guess with polls, it can throw up a few surprises, but I'll come to you next, Hazel. In terms of that integration of other systems, other technology, obviously SWG have a role to play and support in that. Is there anything you could add in terms of what people should be, what's right for their organisations? I know that sounds a very oversimplified question, but how would they know what's right? Because is that half the reason why they're having problems with integration of systems, that they haven't had the right technology in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a surprise that sustainability came top, followed by integration, and the two really do dovetail, likewise with compliance. But I think, as Mark said, information is key. As a software vendor, we are more and more often being asked to integrate with other products, which is something we completely advocate. We don't do everything. We're not a building management system provider, but we can readily integrate with the building management system to help manage energy use, make sure energy is only being used in spaces that it need to be used in. There's very commonplace integrations that we're all familiar with things like Outlook, but also more commonly smart devices, IoT, sensors. I think we're going to talk a bit later on about the flexible workplace and hybrid working, but sensor integration is becoming more commonplace. We can see how we're using the spaces that we occupy. We do have some incredibly complex integrations as well. We've got one particular hospital client site where I think there's about 14 or 15 different integrations, and they integrate the CAFM system with things like automated guided vehicles, robots, effectively to deliver meals, to remove waste, to deliver catering and linens, as well as things like a nurse call and a meal management system. So I think, back to your original question, Peter, about what's right for the business. Every business is going to have unique needs, but it's all about understanding the decisions that need to be made, looking at where the gaps in that data is, and making sure your systems can talk to one another. two-way integration, systems talking to one another is going to give you complete visibility of how your buildings is performing and give you the intelligence you need to make sensible decisions.
That's great. And Simon, to bring you in, you're going to tell me North America are getting this all right, aren't you, as a broad brush? But from your experience here in the UK and US, how much commonality that would be with I guess the North American UK approach? Are you seeing similar issues if we run this poll in North America? Would there be similar poll results? I know there's not, predictions can be wrong, but anything to add from you?
I think from a corporate perspective, the poll would be very similar. I think the legislative regulatory environment's a little different, but I think, if we're thinking about some of those kind of big picture trends around kind of net zero sustainability, organizations in both the UK and the US are facing kind of growing, regulatory investor customer pressure to get kind of net zero, get green, get sustainability right. I think what I'd like to point out though is, I as somebody who works in integrated communications and someone who pays attention to the media a lot, I think we just have to be conscious of kind of closing the gap between kind of buzz, hype, trends, and actually kind of meeting these goals. I think I was interested to see that one YouGov poll at the beginning of this year found that only less than 1/3 of UK business leaders have some sort of net zero strategy in place, which kind of, I don't know, does that match the hype? It maybe suggests that there's some way to go. I think the other point I want to make here, and I just, to echo what previous panelists have said actually, is that yes, all those trends at the beginning are interlinked. Right, it's inescapable. And if you think about, I think the second most popular was regulatory challenges. Was that right?
That's right, from memory. Yeah.
So it's sure that there's a big piece of that is, new energy legislations coming in, but it's also about how organizations are going to adapt to this kind of new hybrid world. And all those kind of legal challenges that change with that, and where does FM software, where does workplace technology fit into all this? I think it's about it's about that integration piece, but it's also about how that integration gives you the insights you need to kind of fuel that decision making.
That's great. That's great. And I think it's interesting, and thank you, Steve, one of our audience members, to say not to ignore some of the other areas. But Steve, you'd be pleased to know when it comes to BIM, workplace management, cybersecurity, that's all on today's episode. So I'm just going to move on to the next section. But I think to wrap up here, as I said, the guide does tackle some of this, but like one thing about technology, and there's better people than me, including our panel, that will know more about this. The beauty of technology, it doesn't stand still, and there's always something that another trend might be on there. But currently, sustainability, compliance, and the integration seem to be the big three areas based on that poll alone. So that's something. But as promised, we're going to move on to other areas such as BIM, workplace management, and cybersecurity on today's episode. So that's my cue to move along. So system selection, like many of us in terms of I guess the dreaded procurement process, which again the guide does talk about, and I didn't mean to say dreaded, of course it's an important fundamental area of any process, is the procurement process, is in terms of how you look at to invest in FM software and how that helps to make the right decision, I guess. But before we move into that discussion and look at the advice and tips around a successful procurement process, we've got another poll, you'd be pleased to know. So again, keeping you alive and active in terms of today's episode, to keep you on the ball. So in terms of our next poll, in terms of when we look at FM software selection, is your organization even planning to invest in a new upgraded FM software system over the next 12 months? Less options this time, you pleased to know. Yes, no, don't know. So just give you a few more moments to look at that. And again, if we're looking at the focus on FM software, like traditional aspects of CAFM software, help desk, job management, self-service, asset management, and plan maintenance, there might be some of the areas that when we ask for new upgraded, they might be areas that you're particularly looking at. But yeah, I'll just probably close the poll there. I think there's been enough time. So you've got 50% saying yes, just under a quarter saying no, and over a quarter saying unsure. So again, when it comes to that, and I'm going to say what's on the tin there, we've got half our audience saying yes, they're going to be looking at invest in upgraded FM software. So I'll probably start with yourself this time, Hazel, as it says on the tin. Is there any advice, tips for ensuring that process? Going back to the previous question, to the point, how do you ensure that you get the most appropriate software in that's going to meet your needs? So how much of the role does the procurement process have in this?
I think it's really important, Peter, and you talked through briefly some of the aspects an FM software system can offer. So I'm not going to go through those, they're all outlined in the guide. I think from the perspective of a vendor, what I would say to a company who's looking for a new system is consider what you need carefully. You know, it's great to put together a wish list, but it's really important to identify which bits are essential and must have and which are nice to have. Involve the relevant people internally. So it's not just FM and estates management. You'll probably need to involve IT. You might need to involve finance or HR operations if there's some sort of integration with a finance system. Clearly, you're going to need to get the buy-in from the finance team as well on the purse strings. But be really careful about the requirements list. All too often we talk to a company, we know they're looking, and then we get the procurement document and it's a list as long as your arm twice over. And it's really hard for a vendor when we get that list to know what's really important. And quite often vendors will back out of a procurement process because they think they can't meet the need. And then the customer says, well, why didn't you bid? And it's because you had this whole list of requirements that isn't in our scope of product. So yeah, the guide does talk through some of this. It talks about identifying need. It talks about looking at return on investment. But I think identifying requirements is important. A couple of other things I'd suggest is when you get a shortlist, ask for reference sites, talk to the customers, particularly if you're in a particular sector, like say the NHS, that's got a lot of sort of strict compliant regulations. Find out how they deal with that customer base. Find out if there's a forum where you can talk to other customers when you go live. Is there a user group? Do they have a special interest group for your particular sector? And also consider not just the functionality, but how that vendor is going to work with you down the line. Can they implement themselves? Can they deliver training? What sort of support and maintenance do they offer? And what do upgrades look like? Is the onus on your IT team? Do they help you with that? So I think the guide talks in a lot more detail, and that's a bit of a whirlwind tour from the vendor perspective, but that's what
I guess from that, with to oversimplify it, and that's me, not you, Hazel, in terms of just that element of research and actually understand what you're getting and the different components possibly outside, and ask other customers and various people of the use of that to get experiences. So there's a lot of probably discovery phase needed, and the guide does go into more detail on this. That's probably needed before you do jump in looking at particular software. So no, that's important. Simon, I'm going to come to you next because I'm not going to make you last on each point. I made a reference on that, but obviously, as mentioned, you work with FM clients across all sectors. Is there any insight you can add to, indeed, in terms of what's been successful and unsuccessful approaches when it comes to this area of procurement process? So it'd be good just to have an insight. But
yeah, I mean, rather than kind of successful or unsuccessful processes, I just probably stress that, again, that the kind of FM workplace environment is going through incredible change at the moment. And, the good practice guide does actually outline some really good tips as to what you need to be focused on. But I think what I would stress is that, really now, as FMs, you need to understand what changes are taking place in the workplace and facilities environment, what employees and occupiers really need from these environments. So it's all about communication, right? It's all about finding out what it is that employees need, occupiers need, what they want from workspaces, and then kind of building your kind of technology piece around that kind of data, those kind of insights.
Oh, that's great. And I guess, Mark, there may be many people on today's episode in this position without really knowing, but I'm sure there is. With obviously your experience within the industry for quite a number of years now, won't say how many now, but in terms of now being an industry consultant, where do you start with all this? Again, a very simple question, but I think that's where most possibly some of our audience members might be in that position right now. Where do you start? Any tips you can give?
Yeah, I think keep it simple and treat it like you would treat any other project. This is an investment, and this is an investment that's going to give you 5, 7, 10 years of life, depending on how you view it. And you've got to, as Simon and Hazel have both said, it's understanding your stakeholders and getting that alignment with them. And you're going to have, like with any project, internal, external stakeholders, and understanding what those requirements are, and not being shy in challenging yourselves about some of your assumptions. And the other thing as well is one of my favourite phrases, but understand your basket of measures. If you understand your basket of measures, you want to be flexible. I think Simon made the point earlier, technology is changing hugely now, and it's changing at a much faster pace than it ever has. But any business is going to invest, any organisation is going to invest in a project, needs it to be proven. And you need to be able to, so there's a very fine balance there between getting excited by having the latest bells and whistles and still for it to deliver. And I think, as Hazel said, when you're going down this route and exploring those avenues, you really need to see some real life experience, real life case studies, what those people are delivering elsewhere, rather than the theory. You need to practice to reinforce that decision-making process. But understand what you're measuring, understand what you want, both now and strategically in the future as well, which is something that often gets forgotten.
And it might be a phrase used at many technology conferences, trade shows I've heard or sat in and been on virtually, but what's necessarily right for your certain organizations might not be right for yours. And I think that's fundamentally that mirroring of what that company might do might not be the best fit for you. So that's where we've got the guidance launched. Go ahead, Simon.
Sorry, just one thing I'm learning from even this kind of short 10-minute conversation is I think one of the other options in that initial trends question was integration, wasn't it? But hearing Mark and Hazel talk about what organizations need to do, I wonder actually if there's it's important to stress that organizations don't get too excited about integration and all those bells and whistles, and actually it needs to be a lot more of a straightforward process of actually understanding first exactly what you need from those systems before you start thinking about all this wonderful, amazing integration between different systems and different functions of the building and or services or whatever it is.
And all three of you managed not to use the return on investment, but you'd be pleased to know the guide does go into that, as well as functionality and building a business case, because of course that's one of the fundamental blockers or early questions is what's the return on investment. So again, the guide does go into that and hopefully help you build that business case to secure the right software for your organization. So thank you for the audience that are sending questions in, and I will integrate those into the episode as well as the Q&A, but we're going to just move on. I think for me, as I say, the guide touches some upon in terms of some of the best practice around that, but just probably leaving this section that just do not mirror what some organizations do, because it might not be right for you, as I've said before. Right, the new normal, this phrase that was coined probably not, as we just remarked, 2 years of lockdown, but was a couple of months after the first lockdown, about what is this new normal. I've already alluded to that many of our episodes have covered the subject of this term hybrid working, which many organizations have adopted. Some politely in our sector have dropped it, but it is still a term that's been used and spun by the media globally as well as here in the UK. But as promised, as normal proceedings, we've got a poll to kick off this section, and this section's about, do you have a system in place for space or workplace management? Obviously, this is an area still high up the agenda. So again, quite simple, yes, no, don't know. But let's see where FM software can really deliver operational and financial benefits. So question just to repeat, do you have a system in place for space and or workspace management? So just give that a few moments. Obviously something that probably individuals were looking at pre-COVID, I hasten to add, but obviously probably more fundamental now as we move into this offices and various other workspaces opening up. So yeah, if we just close the poll there, Lucy, behind the scenes that's doing all this activity, a thank you to you. So yeah, in terms of that, 48% said yes. Now, this could be a discussion point. 45% said no, and again, 7% politely unsure. So I'm going to come to you, Simon, first to change up proceedings.
Yep.
Obviously, hybrid working is a term that's been coined, but not necessarily new if you speak to some workplace commentators, but that's probably for a different episode. Again, you use the word, what trends are you seeing in the industry in terms of hybrid working and this use of space?
Well, I mean, first of all, that I don't know about other panelists, but I found that quite interesting. That I think it was 45% do not have a system in place. I wonder though if that's still a hangover from 2 years of a pandemic. I wonder if it's there's still a fair amount of uncertainty about exactly what the future holds. Though we do tend to be kind of over the worst of it by the looks of things. Yeah, I know it's a topic that we can expound on for hours, isn't it? I think I know you mentioned there the term, new normal, and it's followed by a lot of eye rolling from a lot of quarters, but it's really hard to actually find a term that better explains exactly where we are at the moment, isn't it? Because it seems certain to me that and most of the kind of surveys and research around the world suggests that that 9 to 5 days a week environment is over. It's a thing of the past. But it's also probably important to remember that actually these last 2 years haven't really been flexible working, have they? It's been enforced home working through large periods where the office for a lot of organizations was closed. So now actually what's happening is that organizations are thinking, oh God, all right, okay, we're now in an environment where we have to make decisions. We're now in this moment in time where we actually need to think about how much control, how much choice, how much freedom, flexibility we give employees. And then we need to think about what kind of workplace or facilities we provide for them to support them. So, it's I think in terms of trends, in terms of where we are, I think it's about, reframing the workplace, reframing facilities as, thinking about their purpose first, talking to, as I mentioned earlier, talking to employees, first and foremost, understanding what they want, what they need, how flexible they want to be. If they come to the office, why do they need the office? What kind of environments and spaces will they need in the office? And then, thinking about how to support them. So thinking about other terms that have been around for before COVID, like activity-based working. So thinking about, if you're designing a space where employees' needs come first, how's that going to look in the environment? What amenities and designs are you going to provide that support those? And then, of course, thinking about it from an asset management point of view, and how do you then adapt your asset management plan to deal with fluctuating occupancy? How do you ensure even the intangibles, right? How do you ensure that the facility, if I'll give you an example, I think a lot of people are in agreement that the kind of hybrid workspace is or the workplace is going to kind of find this new role as a place where people come together. And it supports all those other intangibles like socializing and buzz and culture. But if you don't get your workplace asset management strategy right, that all falls apart. Right? If you end up having an environment that's got no buzz in it whatsoever, or actually doesn't work because you haven't adapted your asset management plan to deal with maybe different areas of the building being busier than others on different days. So, as I said, there's lots and lots to talk about. So I'll shut up there.
No, thank you, Simon. And as you say, we could go on for hours, and many of the previous episodes have tackled that new normal or hybrid working. But Hazel, there's 45% based on this poll here that haven't got software to support at the moment. So for those that might on the back of this think, well, we need to start looking at some FM software, what advice can you offer?
I mean, what I would say is look at, if you're using an FM software package already, look to see if it does offer space management, workspace management, hot desk or room booking management, because it may just be there's an additional module that you can readily integrate with the FM software you have in place. If you're looking for a brand new one, then that might be a consideration for your requirements. For example, as Simon said, a lot of workspaces are looking to bring people back to collaborate, which means there's going to be certain days of the week that certain spaces are really busy, and maybe that dovetails in with things like cleaning services. So you need to make sure those spaces are cleaned. You can factor in the space management aspect of your system along with the facility services that are needed to manage that space. I think conversely, there might be a need for hot desk management. Some of us probably still have employees or colleagues who are maybe a bit nervous about sitting in an open plan space. Although the worst of COVID is behind us, some people want to work in a quiet space. Looking at a tool that gives the employees the ability to book that, knowing that they've got a safe, quiet workspace to come in and work if they want to. And we're going back to integration again, but if energy consumption is really important and you're having set days, that collaboration days, and you want to integrate with an energy management system or a BMS, just to make sure the heating is on for those days for people coming into the office, the lighting is on, but it's not wasting energy usage on a Friday when there's nobody in the office. So I think there's a lot of considerations, but a lot of vendors will offer space, workspace, hot desk management as part of their standard offering. So talk to your provider or anyone who you're looking at procuring from.
And Mark, to bring you in here in terms of your role and expertise as a consultant now, but obviously been in the FM industry as a number of years, how is this all built into an FM strategy, and how is technology so important to supporting this? So really, I think focusing on the strategy aspect, how is this integrated?
The key thing is it helps you manage the variables. I think that's the real challenge we've got now. There are so many variables, and energy prices we know about at the moment, and the like, and how people want to use the workplace. That's really come to the fore of late. And I think that those strategies now we're finding that we give advice to clients on their strategic direction. The review period for those now, and some of that's been compounded by the last couple of years, of course, is now typically a 3 to 4 year type of cycle. So, the golden rule used to be, 5-7 years, we'll know where we are now, but the pace of change is so quick now. And talent retention, which is a huge part of what happens in the workplace now, when you look at what some people want, you can't, it's difficult in lots of areas now to recruit good talent and keep it. And if you have an appealing workplace and an appealing environment, going back to the point Simon was making earlier, that's going to help you. And I'm a great believer that FM as a discipline needs to be more strategic. And the last couple of years have really given the whole of the sector the opportunity to really step up to that plate now and really offer some added value to the organisations they serve. But to do that, you've got to be speaking the language of the boardroom, and you've got to understand how they measure value, not just financially. Some will be driven that way, but the added value of what they're doing, their green credentials is as important as other elements in their strategy and their direction. And there is some really good stuff that's going on in the marketplace now in terms of having that community feel to some spaces. To British Land got a development that they're just taking forward now at Broadgate Circle, and they're looking to do a net zero redevelopment of an existing building, because that's better for the whole life carbon, rather than knock it down and pour some more concrete and everything else that goes with it. And that is, I think, is virtually pre-let, or the majority of that is pre-let to organisations like JLL and Allen and Overy, and all of them are driven by their investors, these people that it's pre-let to, who have now got a real emphasis in their ESG approach to whom they invest in, to make sure that they have some very clear criteria. And that's also been incentivised by the government. The government changed some of the accounting regulations recently, and you have to be very transparent about the carbon impact of your investments now. So it's coming more and more to the fore. And if you're providing a good workplace and a good environment, you're going to encourage good talent retention and have a good flexible approach to how you employ people. And the other thing as well is, I think people will want to be in the workplace, not all the time. I think everyone's, doing webinars like this was not that common in the past, but they're very common now. But, using an example from closer to home, my youngest daughter, she's at the beginning of her career. She works for a comms agency. She's been really keen to get back into the office and learn from her mentors and her peers about the next steps in her career. And she feels the only way she can do that is being with them and seeing how they interact day to day. That's not happening 5 days a week, but there's a balance to be struck there. As you keep reminding people, Peter, I'm getting quite old now, been around the industry for a while, and you very politely introduced me at these sessions, but for somebody of my age, that's not necessarily an issue anymore, and feel quite comfortable working in an office at home or a garden office or whatever else it might be. So there's lots of moving parts to it, and I think the more FMs think about it strategically, the more you'll make that tech work for you in a positive way.
Yeah, and I think there, Mark, and I'm glad you're still on the webinar. I've not insulted you that much, so you haven't left us. But yeah, from that point of view, I think it's key in terms of the technology to help that business case, and hopefully the 45% that answered our poll may have further questions to ask of their organisations about the need. But I think the key there, we've had a couple of audiences. I'm happy to share the episodes that have gone to further detail about hybrid working. It's one thing that no one's actually mastered this yet. I think it's still in that infancy of organisations trying to build their culture around that. And obviously technology has a massive impact to support that culture people and organisations want as we move out of this post-COVID world. So that's good. So as promised, we've got questions coming in and I'm keen to get them, but I'm also aware of the time. It was an area, as mentioned, Mark, you kindly just referenced back to the previous point, the importance of sustainability in your comments previously. But one of the options on our first poll, from what individuals can remember, was BIM. And Steve, who's kindly in the audience, has reminded us about the importance of BIM and cyber security, as they may have not come high up on the poll initially, but how important they are. So we know that BIM, which is building information modeling, but as someone said, should have been better information management, because that's essentially what's at the heart of it, is something that's in terms of in recent years has seen more widespread adoption across architecture, design and construction, and it's been more and more used across FM and estate managers in the operational phase. You could argue it's still in its infancy in the UK, but it's starting to see its potential. So I'd just be intrigued. We've got another poll for our audience. So if Lucy and Claire can work their magic, and there it is. Are you using BIM data in your operational phase for facilities estates management? So you're going to contradict my point that it is actually being widely used. So the answers are yes, no, not yet, but have plans to, unsure and not applicable. So just to repeat the question, are you using BIM data in the operational phase for facilities and estates management? So just give you a few moments to fill the poll in. There you go. I think if we can close the poll, that'd be great. Thank you, Lucy and Claire. So you've got, are you using BIM data? You've got 38% saying not yet, but have plans to, 34% saying no, 9% saying yes, 16% saying unsure, 3% not applicable. So looking at that, you've got a big proportion of the audience there that are looking at not yet, but have plans to know. And Simon, I'll come to you first, echoing the poll results, but we have been talking about BIM for a long time. It's something that was probably raised to me. I started at the Institute in 2014. So it was soon after that that BIM was on the horizon, and this term that trying to get my head around it, as well as how it impacted the profession I represent. But how has technology caught up? And essentially, I don't know if that poll contradicts this point, but I'd be interested to have your view. Is FM ready to fully embrace BIM?
I'm not totally surprised by the answers to that poll, because it follows what I've been hearing. As you say, Peter, look, I've been writing about this stuff for almost 15 years. I remember BIM cropping up quite early in that time. But, you know, as Steve Voller has said in the Q&A, you know, is it a case of it not being fully understood and mature enough yet? Probably. Yes, actually. It seems to have had a number of false dawns. And I do think fundamentally the problem is that it's misunderstood. I think a lot of people kind of mistake it for kind of 3D modeling or virtual reality, which is another sort of option in the initial trends poll. I think it's important to remember that 3D modeling and virtual reality are actually very important component parts of BIM, but it's not BIM. BIM is a kind of workflow process that's enabled by technology and better enabled as technology advances. I just wanted to also point out, I don't know, it's just a quite, I know BIM doesn't sound like the most exciting topic in the world, but it is really quite interesting about, you know, how it, the parallels it has with just kind of technology and technology adoption and advancement in general. I think if you think about virtual reality, which is, as I say, a really important component part, or increasingly important component part of BIM. That's also experienced a number of false dawns over the last few generations. I was thinking about kind of the Hollywood movies in the 90s that had virtual reality as the kind of coming, you know, some lesser known like The Lawnmower Man and some better known like The Matrix. But then virtual reality disappeared again. And then it only kind of cropped up again with the latest generation of video games and kind of PlayStation and Google and what they were doing with VR. And I guess the hope now is that maybe the technology has caught up so that it has some kind of lasting power. And then I'm thinking about other trends we see at the moment as well. You know, for the last 6 months, everyone's been talking about the metaverse, haven't they? But do we have you seen the metaverse in action recently? It doesn't seem very exciting. I'm not sure people really understand what it does or what it can do, what its potential is. And I think that's exactly the same for BIM. I think there's still a huge education piece around, you know, what it does. I will stop talking and let the other panelists.
That's great, and I'm glad you brought some film references in there, because I've sadly watched both those films as well. So there you go. Mark, I'll bring it. How much of synergy or agreement you with Simon about the adoption of BIM in your experience?
Yeah, I think FM have been slow to adopt it, but equally, to be fair to FM, I think, you know, I've seen firsthand that they haven't necessarily had the opportunities. I think those opportunities are coming around more frequently now. I'm old enough to remember the BIM for FM group that used to be around with SWG and BIFM as it was back in the day and everything else, and that was doing some really good work. But the government originally mandated this, and the government hasn't had the ability to invest in a lot of large capital projects that would have given some of the good data that's out there and allowed it to develop. But it's becoming more and more commonplace. I think FMs need to be prepared to fill the skills gap, and I think there needs to be some upskilling of existing FMs. There's some excellent knowledge out there in the FM world at the moment, but they now need to start understanding what it takes to handle the data, because we're overwhelmed with data in the workplace and FM sector now already. What we need to understand is how we use the good quality data to drive informed decisions going forward. And I think I was surprised at how many people are not considering taking BIM forward, if I'm being honest with you. So I think that's a really good sign, looking at the poll. But I think that skills gap is one that needs to be closed. And I think having very well experienced FMs working alongside the newer people that are entering the sector that are much more used to handling that data and the like is really quite an exciting combination. And I think that's the next phrase that needs to be adopted. And the power of this technology is huge. I was on a client call yesterday for a large healthcare project, and they're in the early stages of designing one of the new hospitals that the government has promised. We're sitting there and we can see layers of this building as it's currently perceived to be designed on a fairly cheap user platform that we can all see on a web browser at any one time. And you've got it's very outline design at the moment, but the outline design, and you understand the principles of where that building is going to be, how tall it's going to be, we're already talking about the FM routes and how they're going to work, how you're going to, the broad principles, how you're going to replace assets. And that's probably 2-3 years away from when it may be constructed. And that's huge compared to where we were. I can remember having a team doing clash detection in the building, using a 3D model in 2006, and that was seen to be cutting edge now. But that pales into it. It's like the difference between a phone that used to play Snake on and an iPhone now. It's just the contrast is huge. For those of you that know what Snake is, if you don't, never mind. But yeah, it's massive. The pace of that change now, and the ability to really drill into that detail at a relatively cheap cost, I think, is really going to change the market.
Yeah, and bringing on the market there, obviously, thank you, Mark and Simon, from a UK perspective. Obviously, Hazel, and I'm aware of time, but SWG are active in the Scandinavian market, so actually we're arguably ahead in terms of BIM adoption. So any lessons we can learn based on Simon and Mark's and a couple of comments from our audience in agreement with Simon and Mark in terms of there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of Pro BIM, but how are our Scandinavian friends getting this right in your view?
Yeah, I think there are obviously leaps and bounds ahead. There's a lot we can learn from them. We could probably run a whole webinar on this topic, but the skills gap that Mark and Simon both alluded to is really important, and it's about skilling FMs to know how to take that data from the build phase. We've worked with clients who've had the luxury of taking on a new build with a complete BIM model, and we've worked with them to understand which parts of that BIM model they need to bring across into the operational phase, bring into their CAFM system in order to manage the assets, the component parts, bits that might be hidden behind a wall. But we've also worked with companies, and like this is from big government public buildings down to local schools where there's been no BIM model, but they've wanted to retro BIM or historic BIM or whatever you want to call it. Laser scanning is so much cheaper and more affordable nowadays. We worked with a local authority school. We had a team that went in over the weekend when there was no pupils there, and they laser scanned the building. And in that particular example, it was because there'd been renovations that hadn't been kept up to date, drawings were out of date, and they couldn't do renovations moving forwards. But Simon mentioned the potential for 3D modeling. And I think we've seen that in COVID times. Modeling space, say students couldn't go and visit the university accommodation that they'd be living in, but we use 3D visualization and modeling to help to visualize that space. We can also use that to market commercial spaces that aren't even built yet. And a lot of that is happening in Scandinavia, and it's starting to happen here. But it's just about getting the market to that place where people are comfortable using that data for whatever the end purpose may be, whether it's maintenance, marketing, visualization.
That's great. And I think on every touch point of today's episode, which the guide does go into, we have got dedicated webinars in our back catalogue that do focus on BIM, which kindly Hazel and Mark, both representatives from our own technology special interest group, have been involved in. So just to let our audience know there. So I'm aware of time, and that's on me as host. Our last section, and I hear the groans from our audience that there is no poll this time, but I want to keep this brief, even though it's such an important subject, and it is an area that we're looking at in terms of an institute with other partners around the threat of cybersecurity. But I just want to test, even on the chat function, I'm going to ask the audience, how nervous are people about cyber attacks? And it could be yes, no, or not sure, but it'd be interesting if you just can use the facility there. But if I could just ask the panelists this, how do you mitigate the risk around cybersecurity? So I'm going to start with you, Hazel, obviously from as a vendor, how do you advise organizations around this risk that is going to be more and more prevalent as you look at current affairs and the status of the world when it comes to cybersecurity? It's something that many organizations globally is high up on their board agendas. So how do you address that? And if we can have a quick answer, that'd be appreciated because of the time.
Yeah. Obviously, the threat of Russia, everyone believes the threat to the West is going to be through a cyber attack. And the danger is there's so many entry points now. It's not just desktop to laptop, it's phones, it's tablets, it's smart devices. A lot of companies are looking at their BYOD, bring your own device policies. So whereas before people might have used their own machines, their own tablets to access their systems, their FM systems, their data, putting more stringent controls into that, organizations mandating the use of certain firewalls, certain virus protection, even saying they'll have to have control over employees' own devices if they're using those to access sensitive data. There's obviously things like multi-factor authentication, which we'll all be familiar with. So, if you do a PayPal transaction, you often get a text message. It's making sure that that level of security can be applied to any FM systems and other operational systems that you've got. Looking at your suppliers, are they ISO 27001 accredited? That's becoming more and more important, and it's not just them, it's their supply chain. So if you have a hosted CAFM vendor, are they 27001? Is their hosted environment 27001? One final thing, Peter, I would say is that we're seeing a lot more interest in our Azure hosting, because internal IT departments aren't comfortable managing that risk of running all the applications on their servers and the threat of attacks. So hosting, as well as offering the flexibility of payment schedules, it offers a lot more peace of mind in terms of security and backup and data recovery.
No, and I guess go to Simon next. I guess in terms of organised crime and cybersecurity, this is where it's all heading. Is that if you listen to experts around the subject, any views from you about the concerns, whether from a North American viewpoint or UK? I guess it's global.
I don't think I can add too much more than Hazel already has there. I did hear an interest. My colleague was at MIPIM last week, and I'm sure some of our audience members probably have heard this story, but there was a really fascinating story about, I think, a casino in Las Vegas, which had been compromised or hacked through its smart fish tank. So that kind of shows you just the extent to which, the number of entry points and the number of potential headaches that are in this kind of new smart world. And then just to re-emphasize the point, it's also this kind of home working, hybrid working piece. More and more of that information is leaving the four walls of the office, and organizations just need to understand exactly where it is, what employees are doing with it, and kind of ensuring that it's safe.
No, thank you. And we've got a couple of the audience for that call out to myself about their concerns. And we've got a number of people from certain sectors, including the civil service, that are showing concerns. So obviously certain sectors as well as organisations are probably more at threat as well. So I'm going to move on to question time because I'm aware of time. Just to aware the audience, the meter does not run out at 1, and I appreciate this was scheduled to 1. So we're going to slightly run over today, but I'm keen to get to your questions as promised. Now I'm going to go to Steve, who's been quite active on the question chat, so thank you for that, Steve. But I'm going to go into your question about I'm going to put two together. We've talked about the data here, and like many things, and I think Mark, in particular, you alluded about the skills element, and there's some points there raised by Steve around. Do we actually are we actually got the technology, but do we have the skills within workforces to effectively interrogate the data that we're collecting through such software and technology? So what's your view on this? This is a long-standing debate in FM about data scientists and how we actually interrogate that data. As many organizations are swimming in data, how do you address that to ensure you get the correct business decisions and that data interrogated accurately and fairly? So any views on that from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, in short, I think it's happening even now. I think people, data managers or whatever they end up being called, will be an integral part of an FM team. And I think you've always had that. They may have had a different title, they may have been more aligned to a help desk function or how a CAFM operates. But I think there are so many dots that need to be joined now in terms of things such as, carbon workspace management, how you're compliant with your building services, let alone any other elements of the service delivery you're doing. And having people that can manipulate that data in a positive way and use it for good in terms of decision making is going to be integral to what we do. And I think there is a big gap there that can be filled, but needs to be filled quite rapidly with people that have got those data handling skills. And as I said, I think some of that is upskilling we can't just look to Generation X or Y or whatever we call them now, millennials and everything else. I think that there are existing people that they may not realise it because we get excited about data now because it's just more readily available, that have been making data-driven decisions historically for a long time. Yeah, energy management has been a big thing in the hard FM part of our market for 30 years, if not longer. And people are making data-driven decisions around that. There are other elements of what we do where we're making similar decisions, but a more demand-led service, it was alluded to earlier, and things like cleaning and the like. So cleaning areas as and when they need them, because you've got sensors that tell you how often they're being used, because the office is probably only used 3 days a week and compared to how it was used 5 in terms of throughput and volume and people there. I think that's going to be the key thing. But I don't think it's I think it's a positive thing. I don't think it's a negative. I think it's something that can really be taken forward, but it does need to be got hold of. And I know from conversations I've had with the IWFM team on the professional development side of things, that's something that they've looked to address in the professional standards in terms of what they do on technical and the like, having spoken with Abby in the past on that.
Yeah, that's something we are looking at.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to rattle through the questions just to appreciate the time. And Hazel, I'll come to you. So the joy of doing these webinars, we have members from overseas. So thank you, Connor Shaw from the University College Dublin, for your question. Given that a vendor clearly has a vested in customers, how can organizations push for flexibility and portability of systems in future when procuring FM systems? So I guess it's a future-proof question there around flexibility. So any points there for Connor?
Yeah, I mean, that will happen, and we do face challenges. We've had customers come to us from other vendors and the data's not been in great shape. Conversely, we do have customers who use third-party reporting tools to extract data from our systems, from other systems, pull it into things like Microsoft Power BI, and then they've got access to that data. So I think it's all about, like Mark says, having somebody in your department as well as the system who can take that data and manipulate it. Any good CAFM system will be able to give data exports. They shouldn't be trying to lock you in. And it's about making sure you've got that data accessible in a format that isn't reliant on one particular proprietary platform.
So thank you for that. And I will go back to a question here, Simon, to get you involved, but if it can be a short answer, but I don't think it necessarily warrants a short answer, is echoing what we've said about skills. Does the client have the resources and skills to match the needs of the software? So it's a broad point back to the skills debate, but what's your view on that?
Very, very kind of general advice, but important nonetheless. Just understand the resources. Try and learn about as much of you can about the resources that are out there, whether that is special interest groups or other groups that certain kind of specialist bodies are offering, and just try and build that network. Whether also through social media platforms. It's just about meeting and learning people and learning as much as you can.
Oh, thank you. This will be the final question, but I will remind audience members that the questions will be kindly sent on to and we will get back to you. But this is kindly coming from David and Mark. I'm going to put it to your dear self. Examples of the use of sensor technologies being used where it's likely to go. It would be helpful from David's perspective in terms of within NHS sector hospitals within which I work. So
I think it was cutting out slightly there, Pete. So at least at my end. So yeah, I've got the gist of the question. I think we do a lot with the NHS, and I know Hazel and her team do as well. And I think if you look at people like NHS Property Services, they're doing a lot with sensor technology in terms of workspaces and office accommodation. Obviously, in the clinical sense, that there are other initiatives that are coming out from NHSX now that I think can really help control that space and drive and optimize the use of the estate to use it more for clinical use, which is something the NHS has been trying to do for a while now. So that is always going to help, I think. And I think if we can find a way to maintain that momentum, the NHS is a huge employer in the UK, got a huge amount of real estate, and they're under a constant pressure to optimise that estate for clinical use and excuse the phrase, but not so much for the back office or the support functions, and get those levels right. And using that data in the right way and in an affordable way is only going to help them. But there is a lot of good guidance there from the centre of the NHS at the moment and how that can be done better. But some of that does require investment, which is a challenge for some NHS trusts.
Thank you, Mark, for keeping the show on the road.
All right.
From that point of view, I cursed it with a 50p slot as my Wi-Fi went down. So apologies for that. But we've come to the end of questions. So I just want to say a thank you to the panelists here as well as our audience. Apologies we've gone over. But yeah, just got a couple of closing slides here. So CPD number for our members is on the screens there. So please make a note of that for your CPD. So please put that on your CPD records. That'd be great. Just moving along. A lot of what we discussed today is going to be discussed at our Agents of Change conference on the 8th of June. So that's going to be looking at some of the focus on sustainability, future of work, and in terms of those areas and a lot more. So please look out on our website for more details. The 5 keynote speakers have been announced. Entries open. Mark's heavily involved in that as our chair of judges in terms of our awards. That's available. Entries open to the 1st of April. The event's taking place on the 17th of October. So please, time to put your entries in. Again, good practice guide to selecting FM software. Again, something tangible to have on the back of today's episode. So that's important. We've talked around the guide and where that can help you. So please have a look out at that. That is on the website. So please. And again, we've got 2 members from our technology SIG, our LinkedIn group. Again, please join that. There is activity on there, so please have a look out for that. And last but not least, thank you for the viewers and listeners for joining us today. Thank you, Hazel, Mark, and Simon, in terms of your contribution today. As proven, we could have talked hours about some of these subjects, so apology for the Wi-Fi interference as well as running over. We do have a short survey on the back of this, not only to rate today's episode, but what areas would you like our NTT series to look involved in? Some of the areas we touched upon today are in the guide, as I keep referencing referencing, but also on previous episodes and will be on future episodes. So please tell us what you want to know from our webinars. Again, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Hazel, and particularly ServiceWorks Global for your support on today's webinar as well as the guide. And thank you for Simon there in North America and Canada, showing how the Wi-Fi does work in Toronto, but not here in lovely Hitchin, but never mind. So please look out for our next episode. That will be happening next week, next Wednesday at the same time. So please look out for the details of that. That will be on Friday. Thank you again for joining us. And please have a look at the guide that is now on the IWFM website. So thank you again and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.